I'm going to start recording. Oh, thank you. So for the last few years, the MCCPTA Curriculum Committee has been focused on an issue that I would call instructional equity. So we've heard our community raise concerns that classroom experiences differ from school to school or even classroom to classroom. And we've had many of our members ask how we can improve student achievement. And we've been doing research on literacy to advocate for specific ways our school system can address these concerns. This presentation is to share, here we go, what we've learned from research and why we believe we're seeing inequities. We will talk about the importance of curriculum and implementation to address these matters. And we'll talk about the importance of curriculum and implementation to, and then we'll dig deep into specifics about MCPS English language arts at the elementary, middle, and high school level. So tonight we've invited PTA leaders, parents, teachers, and because we wanted to share how our committee has listened to its members and why we're advocating for certain changes in response to those concerns, and hopefully convince you on what we think is the right path so that we can all support these changes. We're also really grateful to have invited guests from MCPS leaders who can share, their kind of updates and vision for how, they think the school should be going in terms of literacy as well. So for this presentation, we're going to ask you to put your questions in the chat. We're going to have some opportunities to fill out surveys, which we're going to compile and we'll of course share with MCPS. And at the end, if we have time, we'll hopefully have some time to answer some questions from the chat. But if we run out of time, don't worry, we'll save the questions and we'll try to circulate answers to everyone who registered. So tonight, we're going to hear from two MCCPTA Curriculum Committee presenters. Our first is elementary lead Reagan Kelly, who's been a teacher, literacy coach, and school leader and leads academic strategy work. And Rebecca, Rebecca Jacobs is our secondary ELA lead, who is also a former teacher, curriculum specialist, and both are MCPS parents. They're both volunteers, but they come with a wealth of experience. And so we're really grateful to have their input as part of the curriculum committee. We also, again, we're very lucky to have some guests from MCPS who are Nikki Hazel, who's our Associate Superintendent from the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs, Donna Redmond-Jones, who's Associate Superintendent, Office of School Support and Wellbeing, and Jacqueline or Jackie Lightsey, our Supervisor in Secondary ELA. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Reagan Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm excited to be here today, and I'm going to open us up with a little bit of research from a study that was done nationally. This is a study that took place in 2018, so just before the pandemic. Certainly things have changed in the world of education since the pandemic, so I'll address that a little bit at the end, but I think what I would say is that the heart of what's at this report is pretty typical still to this day, and maybe even in some cases, sort of the results I'll share might even be exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic on our public school system. This is a report that an organization called TNTP put out in 2018. And TNTP is a nonprofit organization that does policy and advocacy work. They do consulting, and they do some research papers that are very on-the-ground research. And so they had been working with many districts across the country and had seen a real challenge districts faced in being able to provide kids with materials, instruction, and the experience that the kids needed to actually be successful in college and career. So they kind of dug in and said, what exactly is going on in schools, and what is the experience that a typical student has in schools? So that's what I'll tell you a little bit about today to sort of frame the rest of our conversation. The data I'm going to share is not from Montgomery County Public Schools. So you will see Montgomery County data. So if you're worried or wondering about that, you will see it. But I will say that the data you're going to see is from districts very like Montgomery County Public Schools. And in fact, I think a lot of the things will resonate with experiences that you've had with your own children or in the system. So I think that it's not about MCPS per se, but you might see some truths in it that are, I think, applicable everywhere. Next slide. The report, as I mentioned, focuses on students. And so students, just like this one that you see here, illustrated here, I should say, Isaac. So this is a student who attends a public high school in the western part of the country in a large urban area, not unlike ours, planning to attend college to study nursing and become an RN, and really has this set on this, his heart set on this dream. So he has spent his 11 or 12 years in school doing what school has asked of him. And so the question that this report really went to answer is, has school done what it promised it was doing? Next slide. For many students, the answer to that question is no. So nationwide, this is national data, nearly 70% of high school graduates go on to college, but far fewer are succeeding once they get there. So 40% of all college students take at least one remedial course, and 60% of African American and Hispanic college students take at least one remedial course. So it's not, the numbers are not much better for kids who are coming out of high school and going straight into career, as employers report that high school graduates enter their roles missing skills that they need to do their jobs well. So the conclusion here is that in general, we're not seeing high schools prepare kids for college or career at a super high rate. Next slide. As TNTPs did this study, they sort of coined this term, the opportunity myth, which you now hear in education a lot, which is this idea that there's a false promise that circulates in the world, which is that if students do what they're asked to do in school, they'll be set up for success. And if they don't succeed, they must have done something wrong. They didn't take the right class, they didn't study hard enough, they didn't show up and do the things they were supposed to do. And it's just actually not the case, is what this report found, is that in fact, it's a lot of this is an adult problem. It's the teachers, it's our community, it's our school systems. How are we making sure that kids are actually getting the experiences that they need to be able to go on and be a nurse or whatever it is that they want to do? Next slide. So one of the first sort of data points that frames the findings were that almost all of the students that they surveyed, and they worked with thousands of students. It was the study itself, and there, Audra at some point will link in the chat a resource guide, and in there's a link to the technical appendix. So if you want to really nerd out on all the numbers and data and like what metrics did they use, all of that is in there, and it's a researcher's dream, so you should definitely do that. But it was across 5 different districts. It was 1,000 classrooms that they visited. It was 30,000 student surveys. It was 20,000 work samples. So it was a pretty large, scale study. And almost all of the students that they surveyed, regardless of who they were, what their background was, what their demographics were, wanted to go to college or beyond, or wanted to do a career that would require them to go to some post-secondary schooling. So, and that was, I think, over 70% of students wanted to had a career in mind that was going to require more than a high school degree. Next slide. The sort of harsh reality, though, of what they found was that students had this expectation that they go to school and it will set me up to be able to do the things that I want to do, be a nurse or whatever it is. And I just need to do what they tell me to do at school. And for the most part, kids do what they're being told at school. 88% of the time, students are working on activities related to class. 71% of the time, students met the expectations of the assignments that they're given. 83% of students across these 5 districts were earning A's, B's, and C's in English language arts, and 78% were doing the same in math. So kids are really they're on task, they're doing the work, they're doing it with some success and seeing grades that reflect them being sort of on track. And so they're getting the message that they're doing well. Next slide. But even when students do what the school asks, they're not being set up for success to reach their long-term goals. Of the assignments, and as I mentioned, it was 20,000 assignments that were reviewed, students succeeded on 71% of the assignments, but they only met the grade level standards on 17% of those same assignments. So each assignment was essentially scored twice. Once, did the student do what the assignment said to do? Yes, no. And did they do it with mastery, 80% or higher? Yes or no. And then was this assignment actually aligned to the standards? Was it at the level of rigor that you would expect for the grade level? And that was only 17%. So that 54 percentage point gap is full of assignments that don't actually even give kids the opportunity to meet the grade level standards. It's just not even at the right level. Next slide. This is not because the kids aren't capable. It's what the study found, which I think is one of the most disturbing pieces of it, honestly, is that when given the chance to try grade level work, students met the bar with pretty consistently. They just aren't being given the chance. Next slide. So across demographic groups, students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, students with IEPs, students who are learning English, and all of those groups, students can and do meet the bar when they're given the chance. In spite of the fact that they're often getting really low quality assignments, kids can be successful when they are given the grade level assignment. So this is breaking down sort of the success rates on the left there of on grade level work were similar across demographic groups. This demographic breakdown is students of color in the turquoise and white students in the lime, I guess. But 4 out of 10 classrooms with the majority of students of color never even got a single grade level assignments, which is just horrific. This kind of trend holds if I replace students of color with any other demographic group for the most part. So whether it's students learning English or students with IEPs, the trend pretty much holds across the demographic groups. This is just illustrative. Next slide. So most students are getting those chances to actually have grade level work far too infrequently. So as TNTP dug in this study, and it was a long study over a couple of years, they sort of, and they analyzed all the data, 4 things sort of surfaced that were really critical to both a student's experience in school and their outcomes. One is this, what we've just been talking about, which is consistent opportunities to work on grade level assignments. One was strong instruction that sets the students up to do more of the work and takes some of that cognitive load off of the teachers. One is deep engagement in what they're actually learning, so the student's own assessment of whether they're engaged in what they're doing. And then the 4th was teachers who actually hold high expectations for what students can do and believe that the students can meet grade level expectations. Fortunately, the sort of confluence of those 4 things is not as common as you would think or want it to be. And particularly for students of color, those students from low-income families, English language learners, students with disabilities, they get even less access to these different 4 different resources. So if you go to the next slide. When students get greater access to these resources, these 4 resources, their outcomes improved. So in the sample that was in the study, access to better assignments was 1.7 months more of academic progress. And you can see across the slide, the higher expectations is obviously the highest, with 4.6 more months of academic progress when teachers have high expectations. Next slide, thank you. And this is especially true, in fact, more true, if that would make any sense, for students who started the year below grade level. So this is really relevant coming out of the pandemic. If students are behind in their class, when they get access to better assignments, stronger instruction, more engagement, and higher expectations, their growth is even higher when they're starting below grade level. This is really, really different than a narrative that we often feels intuitive, which is, oh, if they're behind, give them the stuff at the level that they are. And that's actually sort of not bearing out in the research. Certainly there are times when you have to do that, but with the aim of getting them to the grade level content, and otherwise you end up with exacerbating, sort of the gap in both access and achievement. Next slide. So those spots where kids were really able to have access to those 4 resources were pretty few and far between across these 5 districts, thousands of assignments and classroom observations. In a single school year, the average student was spending about 530 hours of the 720 hours in their classes on assignments that were not grade appropriate. A really concrete example on the next slide. So this is an assignment that one 8th grade class was doing. They read a text called A Mighty Long Way, which is a account of Little Rock Central High School. And they wrote an informational essay analyzing it. So that was a really rigorous assignment that helped them to both master the standards and leverage a really high quality text to do something meaningful and purposeful. In that same district, in the same grade level, and the same titled class, it wasn't any kind of tracking, nothing like that. On the next slide, the students were not given the same chance. These students read a short article called the Billion Oyster Project, and then had to do a multiple choice vocabulary page where they had to fill in vowels on a worksheet, basically. This assignment is not only not aligned to 8th grade standards, it's actually not aligned to any standard in kindergarten through 12th grade, and you don't have to read the text to do the assignment. You might be thinking, there's no way my kids are getting that. Maybe not, but the point is that the discrepancy here from classroom to classroom is pretty significant, and startling, frankly. On the next slide, yep, go back to there. Line graph. One more. Yep, there you go. Thanks. One of the things, this is maybe one of my favorite things to talk about. So as a result of sort of, if you're in 8th grade and you're filling in vowels versus analyzing Little Rock 9, a text about the Little Rock 9, you have really different experiences. So one of the things that they did is they surveyed all the students pretty regularly on their engagement, asked a series of, research-based questions around what the student was doing at the moment that they were taking the survey and how engaged they were, and that kind of thing. And again, the technical attendants, if you're curious, like, what were the questions and what do you mean randomly giving them surveys? It will give you all the details, but I will drop a little hint, which is that the kids had to wear potty training watches, so they would go off randomly, like you do to like a 2-year-old who's learning how to go to the bathroom. So the watches would go off randomly and the kids would have to stop whatever they're doing and take the survey. So it was pretty in the moment. It wasn't like, remember math class yesterday? It was very sort of ad hoc. So this is results showing whether kids felt that their school experiences were engaging in the blue line, worthwhile in the green line, or both in the orange line. And you can see, and maybe you aren't surprised if you have middle schoolers or high schoolers at home, maybe you're not totally surprised to see that engagement overall goes down as they get older, but it certainly isn't helping if they're getting assignments like filling in vowels versus reading complex text and writing analytical responses. One of the fun facts that I like to share is that when they ask kids what they're thinking about, the number of kids who said Beyonce was so high that it could have been its own category if they had like disaggregated what kids were thinking about. Beyonce was the most common thing that kids were thinking about. So, fun fact. Next slide. They're a tough audience. I don't even get a smile for that one. Come on, Beyonce.
I smile.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, good. Smiles. All right, great. Most students were in classrooms where teachers did not hold high expectations for them. This was interesting and alarming. I think one of the disconnects here is that teachers generally very much believe that the state's academic standards are good and they support them and they think they have the right stuff in them, but they, at a much lower rate, believe that their students can actually meet those standards. So that has a real impact on the choices that they're making instructionally, about how they teach, about who's doing the cognitive lift. If you think that your kids in your room can't do it, you're not likely to hand them the reins to do the thinking. Similarly, if you have a choice of activities or a choice of tasks, expectations in, consciously or unconsciously can really influence how you think about which task am I going to give this class? Oh, period 5, they're kind of, I don't know if they can really do it. I'll water it down and give them something different. So that bore out in what we saw with the teachers' expectations. Next slide. One of the really interesting things is that low expectations contributes to sort of a mismatch between the grades students receive and their actual readiness to meet their long-term goals. So this shows us that students who got B's in math and English course, on the far left, 65% of those students were not on grade level on state tests. So they're getting a B and they're not hitting the state standard at that rate. For the ACT and the SAT's benchmark, 52% of students who are, again, they're getting B's in their report card are not meeting the benchmark for college readiness. And among students who got B's, 80% did not pass the AP test. So this is concerning as a parent. This kills me because it just speaks to a mismatch between what kids are getting in their classrooms. It kind of goes back to the 71% of kids are successful on whatever they're given, but only 17% of those things are actually at the grade level. And this is kind of how that bears out, is that your kid seems like they're doing fine, and then you get to the state test and you're like, what? So this was pretty consistent across the assessments they looked at, and it was worse as they looked across demographics. So a lot of subgroups were even more negatively impacted by this issue than is here. On the next slide, one of the things that stood out as they analyzed all of this data is that access to those resources, the variation is not at the district level. It's not at the school level, it's at the classroom level. So it is not, oh, I live in this neighborhood, this school is good. It's actually this third grade teacher is better than this one, or the way that she makes decisions, the expectations she holds, the instruction she gives. It's at the teacher classroom level more so than it is at the school or the district level, which was interesting. So within the same school and subject area, in the highest rated classrooms, about half of kids' time was on grade appropriate assignments, and almost half of the lessons had strong instruction. In the lowest rated classrooms, same school, same subject area, only 13% of students' time was on grade level assignments, and only 1% of lessons had strong instruction. So you can see that bears out at the classroom level within the same school. Next slide. This kind of gets what I was saying before, is that white students and those from higher income families were more likely to be in classrooms that offered the 4 key resources. Students of color, students from low income backgrounds were about 25% less likely to receive grade appropriate assignments, and about half the amount of high quality lessons. As I mentioned in the next slide, as I mentioned, this was done right before the pandemic, this study, but in a follow-up study, TNTP did called Unlocking Acceleration. Again, this will be linked in the resource doc that will be shared in the chat. TNTP determined that in literacy specifically, the results were even worse during the pandemic. So students were spending even more time coming out of the pandemic on below grade level work, perhaps because there was this misconception that we have to meet them where they are. They missed all this learning. We got to start at the bottom, and never sort of that plan to accelerate up to where they're supposed to be. But similarly to what they had found, students were just as successful on grade level work as they were on below grade level work when they were given the opportunity. So that didn't change. Kids are still very capable of achieving, even when given the opportunity. The problem is they're not consistently given the opportunity nationally. Great, I will pass it to, I think I'm passing it to Evelyn.
Hi, everyone. All right, so I'm sure what everyone's wondering is, well, how does this compare to MCPS? So it turns out in 2018, Johns Hopkins did do an independent review of MCPS's K-8 literacy curriculum, and they followed a similar methodology to the TNPT study. They used similar rubrics, questions, review work samples, and they found similar patterns. So students were not receiving enough exposure to grade level text, not enough text-dependent tasks, and teachers often were not using the central curriculum materials as well. And this was under Curriculum 2.0, which was for K-8, the curriculum that predated Benchmark and StudySync. So this is the latest data that was presented to the Board of Ed, progress data. And just like in the TNTP study, you'll see that MCPS classroom measures, which is the column on the far left, and that includes teacher assessments or grades. They're relatively high and stable, but they don't match the district measures, and they don't match the external measures, which are MAP and MCAP scores. It's this is data that's broken down. This is grade 9 literacy rates that are broken down by demographic groups, and you'll see again that the classroom measures are higher than the district and external measures, the first column versus, let's say, the second and third row. And just as in the TNTP study, you'll see that this disconnect impacts our Black and Hispanic students receiving free and reduced meals or farms the most, because, so in other words, most of them are doing the work to pass classroom measures. Over 50% are reaching classroom measures, but the majority are not meeting external measures. Then, in presentations to the Board of Ed, MCPS and other folks have pointed out that the lower MCAP proficiency rates might be because students are not taking the state assessments or MAP tests seriously. And we all have kids, that makes sense, because they don't count towards their grades. So I pulled the MCPS from the MCPS website, which has a ton of data actually, other measures such as what percentage of students receive SAT scores over 480. So the College Board says 480 for, well, I'll call the verbal score, is the threshold for deeming you college and career ready. So as you can see here, the SAT, the number of kids that are passing that threshold on the SAT is actually, it's still quite a bit lower than the classroom measures overall, and it is not that far off from, let's say, the state assessments. I also pulled, just like the TNCP study, I pulled AP scores 3 and higher, even though obviously that's, it's an advanced course and it's, not everyone takes AP scores, but I just took it for comparison. But interestingly, the 3 and high rates also were pretty similar to the SAT rates. And then also what I found important was that if you look at the students receiving free and reduced meals, the percentages actually for the MCAP scores were quite similar to the percentages for SAT and AP. I'm just going to warn you, I'm not a statistician, so this is not a scientific study. This is more for illustrative purposes. But I pulled some schools. I just picked some schools in 3 different categories. What I would say, like low percentages of farm students, sort of moderate percentages of students receiving free and reduced meals, and then high percentages. And so you'll see when you get down to the data that you'll see similar patterns. So the classroom measures, the MCAP scores and the SAT scores are closer, and particularly for, farm students. So you can also see that in the students at the affluent schools in red do perform better, but even there, the students receiving farms have a significantly lower rate of proficiency. So that adds a big question mark. So for sure, like the TP study found, the classroom experience may genuinely be stronger in an affluent school, but it's also possible that it's also because affluent families can afford outside help. And so, again, I'm not a social scientist, but to me, that's when I see that bigger bump up for SAT scores, I'm thinking about outside test prep. So that's the data. And then I think
That's me.
goes
Yep.
back to Reagan, right?
Yep. So the question is, now you've sort of seen, to reorient to where we are, we've seen sort of some national trends. We've seen how those do and don't play out in MCPS. You have obviously your own lived experience with your kids that you're probably thinking about as well. So the question is, what needs to happen to make opportunities more than a myth for kids and their families? So next slide, actually 2 slides, because we're going to click into talking a little bit about curriculum. One of the things that the study found as well is they did quite a bit of work surveying teachers on how they spend their time and their beliefs, as I mentioned earlier, and other things. So teachers reported, this again is not MCPS data, this is national data. Teachers reported spending 7 hours a week or 250 hours a year developing or selecting instructional materials. So you can see the breakdown of the top 2 horizontal graphs there. And teachers are spending, it's about 57% of assignments teachers were creating versus 43% they were getting from the district or state or providing like curricular resources. When teachers selected their own assignments, went to Teachers Pay Teachers, which is a website. Pinterest is also a place where teachers sometimes find lessons, made things up out of their brains or whatever. Those assignments tended to be lower quality than what a district or state provided, whether the district or state created it or whether the district or state purchased it and gave it to them. So you can see that the far left, sorry, that got cut off a little bit the way the screen share is. The far left is whether it's on grade level or not. And the middle one is, does it give a chance to engage in subject-specific practices? And the last one is a connect to big ideas in the real world. So you can see the discrepancy, the gray and the blue of what was teacher created versus not. So this is sort of making the case that, in my opinion, and in my professional experience, for curriculum as a way to level the playing field and give access to at least the assignment piece and guidance on the instruction to be more similar school to school, classroom to classroom, as we saw, than hodgepodge of people. One person picks Little Rock 9 and one person picks Bowels with oysters. Next slide. Sorry, this is, yep. Actually, sorry, this is the wrong slide. Fine. So, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Evelyn.
Oh, okay. So, thank you, Reagan. So as we started our advocacy, we started to talk to MCPS and advocate. We actually discovered that MCPS and the state independently have been looking at this body of research, and it in fact much of the same concepts are in the Maryland blueprint. So at this part, rather than putting words in their mouth, I'm going to ask Nikki Hazel, who's Associate Superintendent of the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs, and she's been gracious enough to come tonight to talk to you about the Maryland blueprint and MCPS's approach.
Thank you very much. And I just want to acknowledge we have lots of folks from our team here today: Malika Brown, Jackie Lightsey, Keisha Logan, and Donna Redmond Jones is here from SSWB. So thank you for being here. And yes, much of what Reagan shared, we also have been discussing, and particularly teaching to grade level standards or above. And we know that that is really how we address the gap that we see in our district. And high quality instructional materials certainly play a part in that, along with strong implementation. The state of Maryland, through the Maryland Blueprint, is really focused on high quality materials and making sure that all of our students have rigorous instruction, and they have been working over the past year with all of the districts in the state to discuss what high quality instructional materials include, and have been really getting feedback from all of the districts about a rubric and what types of things we should be looking for as we move forward, and ensuring that in the future, when any district purchases or develops curriculum, that it includes the components that Maryland State outlines. So if you go to the next slide, you might hear HQIM, high quality instructional materials, and really that is something that includes, if you were to talk about a rubric, it would be standards aligned, that it's research-based, that it's culturally relevant. They want to ensure that the materials represent diversity and perspectives and a variety of authors. They want to obviously make sure the instructional materials are supported by research, and that it includes input from a variety of stakeholders. And I know that they have been going out and getting input from different groups. I believe we have some community members within MCPS that have also had an opportunity to look at some components of the criteria. And they also want to make sure that the materials are reviewed on a regular basis. And the state wants to be able to have some input and or be able to understand what each district is implementing, whether that be a purchased curriculum that is been vetted through something like an ed report, or if it's a developed curriculum within the school district, that it meets the criteria set forth by the state of Maryland. So if you go to the next slide. As we've been doing our work in the district, you know that we have a policy in MCPS that every 5 years we will review our curriculum set forth by the Board of Education. And as we do that, we want to certainly make sure that we are engaging our communities, engaging our staff in the process, and using our evidence of equity questions to do that work. And so the questions are here. And Jackie Lightsey is our secondary supervisor of ELA. And she's, in addition to Malika, they've both been working to use these questions as they've been doing their work to either enhance what we currently have, or as we look to purchase new curriculum, use these equity questions as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you everyone for being here tonight, giving your evening to this important conversation. So if you go to the next slide, we just want to share a little bit in terms of some of the work that we've been doing in MCPS around equitable instruction. So within OSIP, the Curriculum and Instructional Programs Office, we ourselves have taken part in professional learning with an organization called Unbound Ed, which is a team of educators who provide learning for teachers and leaders with the ultimate goal of educational equity. So we have learned so much through engaging with them, and their approach elevates an idea called GLEAM, the GLEAM approach to instruction. And GLEAM is an acronym that stands for grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful. And so since 2021, GLEAM has really been at the center of all of our work, our curriculum work, as well as the professional learning and coaching for our ELA teachers. And now it's a central part of our equitable teaching and learning framework for the whole district. So it's really a driver of everything teaching and learning that's going on in MCPS. So we've taken all of that learning from Unbound Ed and we have turned around and really brought it to our teachers and leaders as much as we possibly can and help them see, okay, how do these concepts really come to life? What does GLEAM instruction really look like? How do you teach in a way that gleams, we like to say, and how do you lead for GLEAM instruction? And so part of the approach from Unbound Ed aligned with GLEAM, and we've delivered some professional learning about this, is the idea of supports versus modifications for instruction. And this follows directly on what Reagan was sharing in terms of the research from TNTP about the moves that teachers will often make to help students access the grade level content that sometimes inadvertently actually lower the learning goal as opposed to just providing the support students need to engage with that grade level content. And it's a nuanced conversation. It requires a lot of thought and practice. So this is just a brief example, but when we talk about supports versus modifications, supports allow that access and modifications lower the level of challenge. And so our work has been to provide examples of both and really help teachers unpack, how do we do that first part of providing supports? And there are times when modifications are appropriate for students who may have an IEP, but for the most part, we really want to think about how do we provide those scaffolds. So if you go to the next slide, this is just a brief example to show you some of the pieces that we've shared in the professional learning that will show the difference. So support might be if a student is listening to an audio recording of the text while reading along prior to the lesson on the text. So in this case, we know the teacher knows that they have a student who might need some extra support with reading. And so they're going to take that step and are being very intentional in their planning for that. A modification, on the other hand, would be to just provide a video adaptation of the text and not actually have the student engage with that written text. And so providing something that actually takes away that challenge where we know students can actually grow. We really know that the real benefits and opportunities for growth come from bringing students to the work of the grade level. And so this is ongoing learning. We just really want you to keep this concept of supports versus modifications in mind as we move forward with our conversation tonight, because it's really key to the idea of ensuring instruction, equity in our instruction. And if you click one more time, I think there's just kind of a summary little item there. Yeah, so the idea of the path to equitable instruction through supports, not modifications, unless of course a modification is called for. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. And I am going to turn it back to our partners.
Thank you. So one of the big movements, as Nikki mentioned and framed for us, is this movement around HQIM. When I say movement, I'm thinking about a reform movement for public education. And so it is, as you saw, it's evident in what Maryland as a state is doing. It is evident in what MCPS is doing. And we'll hear more about that in a little bit. But curriculum is really a way to set a floor for kids so that you don't get those disparate experiences, classroom to classroom and school to school. It is a way to provide teachers with, this is the grade level text, this is the grade level task, assignment, and give more opportunity to more kids more consistently to actually have access to the assignments that we saw in the research earlier is not consistently happening. This is a really interesting study from Thomas Kane out of Harvard that says if all schools could be persuaded to switch to one of the top quartile textbooks, student achievement would rise overall by 0.127 student level standard deviations, an average of 3.6 percentile points. So that's not nothing. It sounds small if you're not in this world of education numbers, but that boost is larger than the improvement a typical teacher experiences in their first 3 years in the job, which is, I'm sure you can all imagine, is a huge learning curve for teachers. So it's pretty significant in the world of student outcomes to see that kind of growth just from using stronger materials. Thank you. One of the things that I want to be really clear on, though, is not any message that would suggest that simply having materials is going to be sufficient to actually change outcomes at scale for kids, to change both the access that they have or the results that you get with those outcomes. It's sort of like if you were to buy a treadmill, that's great. That's like the first step. And now you have access to a treadmill, but it does not mean you're going to lose a lot of weight if it just sits in your basement with like your dry cleaning on it. So, one of the things we talk about a lot in education is this idea of the implementation, sort of like you make it or break it with the implementation. It's whether you run on the treadmill that you actually see the results. It's not the purchase of the treadmill. That certainly helps. It's easier to go down to your basement than it is to go to the gym or go outside if it's snowing or whatever. So it adds a layer, it adds sort of access, and it's an access point, but there's a lot more to it. And so one of the ways I like to think about this is sort of just like losing weight or getting fit or whatever sort of physical goal you might have for yourself, is you start with sort of a vision for like, what do I want? Do I want to wear a bikini in the beach this summer? Do I want to look great at my high school reunion next June? Like, what's my end goal? Do I want to gain muscle mass? Do I want to lose weight? Do I want to tone my legs? Whatever. So you might say, I want to make my heart healthier, whatever your particular thing is. And that's the vision. And then the curriculum is your treadmill that you have now in your basement. Assessment is how you're going to know. Are you going to the doctor to get your blood pressure checked? Are you weighing in on a scale? Are you doing a muscle mass thing? I'm really out of my league here, guys. I'm just working with what I know, with my basic health information, but I think it's working. And then the really important part for teachers, of course, is the professional learning. And so teachers operate, one of the analogies you hear a lot in education is that teachers are like, it's like an egg carton, right? Like teachers each have their own little egg and then they close the door and like, no one's paying attention. Like you can do whatever you want. You can close your door and like my little egg holder is different than Rebecca's little egg holder and no one's paying attention. And so one of the ways that curriculum can help level the playing field for kids and for teachers is to make the experience common. So now Rebecca and I are both using the same materials in our 7th grade class. What is the feedback loop we're getting from our principal? What is the accountability we're getting from our principal? Are you using the materials? What are you seeing? Are you looking at the student data? Are you responding to it? How are you, to Jackie's great point, how are you adding supports but not modifying it so that the kids are getting access to the rigor that they need? And so that's where the sort of professional learning and feedback from reading specialists, from principals, from assistant principals is really, really critical to the execution. This is, in the next slide, you'll see, this is really similar to what Johns Hopkins, I think Evelyn mentioned earlier, the Johns Hopkins study that happened in 2018. They recommended for Montgomery County, and Montgomery County has taken some really strong action in this way, to get an externally vetted curriculum. Their study was looking at K-8 and to come up with a strong implementation plan. And I just want to make sure that both of those are equally important, and that everyone's aware of that. And I think, yeah, so that the next slide is just sort of summarizing that, which is starting with that vision, getting the material, making sure educators have the support, and including opportunities to see their own students experiencing success. That's a real change agent, to see students experiencing success, for students, especially if unconscious bias around expectations for what students can do are part of the equation, which, as we know from research, it likely is. And then monitoring progress to make sure that kids are getting access to those 4 resources in their classes. I will pass it now. I'm not sure who I'm passing it to. Maybe Rebecca. I think so.
I'll just open, but I just want to, I see some questions about grading and homework policies, which are great. But I'm going to try to, if you can hold them for the end. So keep adding questions to the chat, because I think what people want to hear now is like really specific what's happening with elementary, middle, and high school. And that's where Becca is going to present, and we'll get to hear some more from MCPS. And again, thanks to MCPS for coming tonight. So But we are watching the chat. We'll make sure that those questions can get added at the end. Becca, do you want to talk about elementary ELA?
Yep, I think you have to, next slide.
Okay, there we go. I will add, by the way, we had enough of research here, but I've done some research also on special ed and ESOL and English language learners, and having a consistent curriculum actually helps that as well, because it allows the special ed teachers and the ESOL teachers to kind of understand that everyone's working off of the same base curriculum as they create their scaffolds and supports and interventions. So just something to throw in there too. All right, Becca.
Hi, everyone. And I haven't seen the results of the poll, but I have a feeling we're a mix of elementary, middle, and high. So I hope we get to all of you and make sure that you can see the big picture. If you're starting with elementary, that you can see what's happening. And if you're in high school, you can look back and see how far we came. So we call it Elementary ELA, a new hope. In 2022, reading specialists were added to every school, and we really commend MCPS for making that happen. The following year, we were really gearing up for structured literacy and teacher training, and that's when really great reading started to roll out. Some schools were doing, or in Gillingham, so they were really adding in phonics, very explicit systematic phonics were coming back into the schools. And now we know for next year, amplified CKLA is being rolled out. It's a nationally vetted curriculum. In fact, it's so strong and so rich that Boy Who Harnessed the Wind is in there now, which means it's currently in our 7th grade in Study Sync. So we do have to kind of look at the texts that are in there. Now, sorry, I think it's on Study Sync. It might be in the social studies.
Study Sync, 7th grade Study Sync.
Okay. And so we are thrilled, and I don't want to spend too much time. I'm going to pass it over, but just so excited as an example from the opportunity myth of really putting in high quality materials into every elementary school. And it won't be what teacher you have and what guided reading material you got that day. So we're really excited for this change.
Okay, so I think Office of Curriculum and Instructions, and I'm not actually 100% sure who's presenting, is going to offer a little bit more insight into how this is going to be implemented, because I know one concern from our members will be, what is this going to look like? How do we make sure that it's happening in my school? So I'm actually, is Jackie presenting on this, or is
I think I'll start. Is there another slide
thank
after
you.
this?
I think there is a slide.
Yes. Okay. And then Malika, please feel
sorry.
free. So Malika Brown is the elementary supervisor who did an amazing job coordinating the selection of CKLA. And so she's already gotten started with launching the curriculum, starting with central office executive leaders. And we have been able in curriculum, our Department of English Learners, Special Education, Office of School Support and Wellbeing, and we've all been trained on the new curriculum, and we're really trying to start off on a really great foundational level so that we can support schools. And she's going to be providing more training to central office leaders this week, next week. And then we'll move into professional learning for our staff this summer, and then continue with implementation and ongoing support to schools with a really strong collaboration between all of the offices that I named over the next year. Malika, do you want to add anything before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, just as one of the things that we thought was really important was to ensure that our school-based leaders, so our administrators and our reading specialists, they had the opportunity to engage in the curriculum before it hits teachers. So they get a sense, they get a high level overview of what to expect. And so that's what's also coming in the spring. Beginning in May and June, all of our elementary administrators, reading specialists, staff development teachers, they will be trained first. So they will get a high level overview of the pre-K to 5 program. to anticipate what the teachers will be expecting, what the teachers will be learning this summer. And teachers, all teachers, classroom teachers, reading teachers, staff development teachers, academic intervention teachers, English language development teachers, and special education teachers will all receive 2 days of professional learning on the new curriculum.
Thank you. If you can go to the next slide. I think we pretty much highlighted all of this, except for I do want to just acknowledge that last bullet around families receiving information as a part of back to school night, and ongoing efforts just to make sure that our families are aware of what changes are being made and what resources are available.
And just wanted to just also add, because there was a question around implementation. And so part of the implementation and the monitoring implementation for its effectiveness is getting into classrooms. So in collaboration with the schools, with the Office of School Support and Wellbeing, reading specialists, we will be getting into classrooms so that we can see what's happening, so that we can see what we need, what learning we need to continue to provide for teachers, what guidance we need to provide for teachers, what expectations we need to elevate for teachers. And this is going to be not only just throughout the upcoming school year, but throughout the implementation of the program.
Thank you, Malika. Next slide.
All right, and I will take that next piece. So again, I'm Donna Redmond Jones. I'm the Associate Superintendent in the Office of School Support and Wellbeing. So our office is the office that directly supervises the principals. And so when we think about our role with the curriculum implementation and ensuring that there is high teaching quality in a systemic way, I wanted to just bullet out a few of the things that that we do as the principal supervisors. So one of the things that Nikki already mentioned is that it's really important for us as the supervisors to understand the curriculum ourselves, and specifically to understand the different types of shifts that have to happen in the way that we're approaching curriculum implementation and the way that we're approaching teaching, literacy. So for example, we engage in ongoing training, and will engage in ongoing training, particularly about the changes, so that we can understand the shifts, so that we can be on one page in terms of when we are going in to observe what's happening in schools, but also when we're looking at what principals are doing, what school teams are doing in terms of the structures they're putting into place to ensure curriculum implementation. So one is that engagement in training to understand those shifts. Next is ensuring that alignment and coherence and support to schools. So in addition to our role as the supervisors, we also collaborate closely with learning and achievement specialists. And these are instructional specialists who support professional learning within the schools, the staff development teachers. So one of the things that we're really working to refine is ensuring that alignment, ensuring that those learning and achievement specialists are well aware and on top of the changes in the curriculum, so that everyone is on message when we're coming in to support the schools, and we're all on message and on one page when it comes to what principals are held accountable to doing. The next bullet is about our school supervisory visits, and this is just an example. So when we talk about the school improvement plan that every school is responsible for, every school is responsible for establishing goals to improve student performance in literacy, and mathematics, as well as improving school culture and school climate. But for the purposes of this discussion, just thinking about literacy and mathematics goals, we want to ensure that when schools are talking about how they're going about achieving their goals, they're looking very specifically at students who are the most vulnerable, who need the most, in terms of whether that is, whatever student group that is, that based on the data that they need the most. But we want to ensure, just what was said earlier in this presentation, that that students are taught using high quality materials, and that they are taught grade level standards and not below grade level standards. And so all of that has to be a part of the action planning and our roles, because principals are responsible for ensuring that this is systemic. They have to build processes and structures in their schools to monitor what's happening. And our roles is to monitor that they and support them in building those structures. What are the supervision structures in terms of observing, providing feedback, making sure that the leadership team, instructional leadership team, is getting the information about the patterns of what's being observed in classes, and that the appropriate supports are being put into place. This is just for example. So we have supervisory visits and we talk about things like, what is the planning tool that schools are using to ensure that they are planning for high quality instruction, and how is that used in a systematic way within the school and in a consistent way with teams. We go through classroom observations, which has been mentioned earlier, in terms of what are we walking through and seeing in schools, what patterns do we see, and how can we provide that support. And as I mentioned, ensuring that the curriculum implementation is embedded as a part of the action planning in that school improvement work. So I already talked about supporting the principals with processes and structures to monitor the curriculum implementation, monitor that teachers are getting observed and getting high quality feedback, and that they're being evaluated, so that we're using the systems we have in place to provide that high quality feedback and that level of accountability. And finally, we continue to collaborate with the curriculum office to address areas where specific schools need supports, because you might have different needs in different places. And so where we see the need, we're collaborating with the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs here again to provide the supports, so high level of support to principals who need it, as well as combined with that level of accountability, because principals are evaluated too, and certainly as a part of their evaluation is this idea that they have set up systems and structures to ensure that the curriculum is implemented.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm just gonna, this has been really helpful. I just want to make a couple of notes. I mean, sometimes I'm often asked, because we've been talking a lot in MCCPTA about secondary ELA. So I'm really glad you guys came in, because part of the reason we're actually quiet about elementary is not because, we don't think it's important. In fact, it's really important, but because we have been working a lot with MCPS, and we know there's a lot of groundwork being done. We knew the curriculum was going to come out, and now the big piece of it really is this implementation. So we really do appreciate that OSSWB has come in today. I did see in a question, there was one question about implementation that asked whether or not peer learning communities are there peer learning communities, especially at the elementary level? Well, generally, but for this ELA rollout too. Oh, I don't know if Mimi wants to elaborate on that, if you don't mind coming off mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Evelyn, are you referring to my question?
Yes, Mimi, yes, you had a question about peer learning communities for teachers across schools.
Oh, right. It's been my experience that it seems like each school principal has significant autonomy in how they run their school. And, honestly, depending on kind of how senior and how long they've been at a school, it seems like supervision starts to kind of fall off the longer they've been there. We had a situation at my school. Anyway, I'm wondering if the county, the central office, could possibly look into peer learning communities of practice, where teachers can actually come together and learn from other schools how to implement, right? Because what I also am experiencing is that a lot of the schools that are struggling, if you're basing it on test scores or farms, they're not the ones that have the master's teachers, and not masters as far as degree, but masters as like teachers who have been proven to be effective teachers and have been, stable at their school. So if there was any way that they could do that, because if we just leave it up to the principals to build those relationships with other school principals to share some of that kind of learning between those teachers, I don't think it would happen.
Okay, well, so actually, I just realized I've been told that we're like short on time, so I'm going to keep moving. But thank you for that comment. And maybe there can be a response in the chat or like after for Q&A. So I did promise some notes for the PTA leaders. I'm just you can sort of see on the list. Now that you understand what the changes that is coming to your school that's already started, how can we support? Well, one thing is that your next PTA meeting, just to kind of reinforce and resonate, is to ask if your reading specialist and your principal can present on the new Amplified CKLA and structured literacy, present on data. I think Donna mentioned the school improvement process. So PTAs can get involved at those stages to ask a lot of the questions that you have, because that personally, what is happening on the ground is what's going to impact your student the most. Okay. I did want to add a note. The parents will ask they're alarmed when they see some of this data on the grades and whether or not they're able to tell whether or not their child is on track. So this is not at all anything official. This is just coming from me, Evelyn Chung. So consider this, I'm telling my friend what to look for based on me reading everything that's out there, the map report explanation and whatnot. So if I were a parent talking to my friend, I would tell them that you should look at the map reports. We do have state MCAP reports, but they're coming pretty late for a variety of logistical reasons. And so you can find your child's map report on Parent View under Documents tab, and then look for the map report. Things that I would look at are under reading goals. You're going to see a couple of categories. See, are any of them at low or low average? If they are, it doesn't mean that, that's not determinative. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why your child might not have done as well on the exam as they are actually able to do, reading and writing, but it's definitely a flag to say, let me talk to the teacher about this, or the reading specialist. I've also listed the expected grade level Lexile bands for each grade, 3, 4, and 5. And so that goes from 520, for example, in grade 3 would be the beginning of the year. And then by the end of the year, to keep the child on track to get, to college and career readiness by the end of 12th grade, we would hope that they're able to read at the 820 Lexile. So you'll see on your math report a Lexile band. I would see, is that, depending on whether it's fall, winter or spring, is my child around that band? Because if they're not, if they're well below, that's another sign that, it's time for a conversation with the teacher on whether or not your child needs additional supports, interventions, and whatnot. I also found this recent analysis from the Office of School Accountability. They are looking at NAP score to see whether or not they are predictors of the state assessments. And so 750 is a score for college and career readiness. So I took from that report. Again, this is not the official thing, but I pulled it because as a parent, I said, well, if grade 3 getting a 197 predicts that you're going to pass the state assessments, that's helpful information for me as a parent. And if you're not there, that's a flag to, maybe I should start asking questions and thinking about how I can help my child a little more and talk to the teacher about what kind of supports my child needs. And the last tip is that you can get a longer student profile report if you ask your teacher in school, and that has more information about broken down by the Common Core standards. That was new information for me. And then the slides, which you'll get later, and the resource guide will have some more resources if you want to support your child at home, phonics resources, if you want to check the Lexile of the book that they're reading, and so on. Okay, more things, questions that MCPS actually provided for parent-teacher conferences. And now we'll move on to middle school literacy.
Okay, so I can tell from reading the chat, I'm going to use my inferences. There are a lot of feelings about about novels and what's happening, and we want to give you the chance to collect your information because there is a chunk of you who are here from middle school literacy. So we will give you a survey at the end so we can gather that information. I don't want to lose the chat, but I don't want to just sort of derail the big picture. But please know you will have a survey so that we can understand what is happening. So that's just to my friends on the chat. So middle school literacy, where we were, again, the Johns Hopkins study in 2018 recommended that we move away from curriculum 2.0 and we adapted Study Sync. Many of you have children who are currently using it or have used Study Sync. And we have found from hearing from our members that there is inconsistent use among schools. There's a lot of teacher choice, which we know from what Reagan presented doesn't always leave. You can have different experiences even in the same school, very teacher dependent, a lot of digital bells and whistles, and a lot of excerpts instead of full novels. And we also see on the chat, a lot of people said it doesn't seem like they were reading a lot of novels. And also we're doing fewer than the recommended units, 4 out of 6. Next slide, please. And again, we know that strong materials matter. Next slide. Take a minute. This is a case study that we have gotten from our members, and in the chat, just write something you notice. Take a minute. I am a former teacher, so synthesize and put something in the chat that you notice about some of the schools. Okay. What do you notice? What are your thoughts? Okay, so someone wants more novels. So I think we can see that students in middle school are having inconsistent experiences within Study Sync. And we know that an RFP is happening and in very, very soon. And we really hope that we can leverage a very strong RFP similarly to what we saw happen in elementary school so that we can get an incredible curriculum. Can we go on to the next slide? Again, we will be sending out a survey. We are interested in collecting your experience. And again, our recommendation is to articulate a really strong vision for middle school. I'm a former middle school teacher, and to really leverage the RFP, which is coming, to select a rigorous 6 through 8 program curriculum with really good materials to build knowledge with complete text. This will align to that Johns Hopkins recommendation from 2018. Next slide.
Okay, thank you. And so I just want to welcome again Jackie Lightsey, who's the secondary ELA supervisor at MCCPTA, because parents have asked us about the future of Study Sync. And Becca mentioned the RFP. I was wondering if you could provide us with an update on what MCPS is planning for middle school ELA.
Sure, and I think Rebecca really did a great job of covering it. We do have, we are approaching the end of our current agreement with McGraw-Hill, who provides Study Sync. And so as part of our usual process, we will be launching an RFP. We intend to use a very rigorous and collaborative process, very similar to what elementary did, to select the future curriculum for middle school. Part of that, informing that process is what's going on right now, which is an evaluation of Study Sync implementation by our Office of Shared Accountability. So they bring the research lens, the statistician lens, and looking at what's happening across classrooms. And what we really seek to understand through this evaluation is, you know, what are teachers experiencing? What are students experiencing? And when we do see that variability in implementation that we saw in the previous slides, what are the factors that actually lead to that variability, so that when we move forward with the next curriculum, we can try to address some of those pieces and make sure that we're from the very beginning setting up our district and our teachers to be able to implement the curriculum with integrity. So we're going to hopefully learn a lot through this evaluation about, why teachers are maybe making different choices and why we're seeing that, the variability that we discussed. So we're looking forward to that process, and we're hoping that it will result in something that everybody is very much in support of, and it will be great for our students. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Oh, we're at 8:15. So again, just because I know we're going to want to get to high school, PTA presidents, invite your school content specialists. We're going to include some questions you can ask. Don't be shy. It's okay. Parent engagement makes a big difference. And again, the caretaker's guide to the math reports. And then now high school. So, Becca.
Okay, again, this is a sampling we've collected from people and their own experience. And if you want to take a minute, it will probably take a minute and a half to read through it and see big picture ideas. It is, just what do you notice about some of the experiences we have seen and heard and have lived in high school? Okay, people are noticing some of the low Lexile levels. There's various, okay, so I think what it sounds like from what I'm gathering quickly on the chat, I'm using my synthesizing skills, is it looks like the kids are having different experiences, and there is great concern about the volume of reading and the rigor of text. Hopefully I synthesized that well. We're going to go on to the next slide. All right, I think this is you, Evelyn.
Oh, this is me. Okay, and this is another just another drill down of 2 students. These are actual students in the same high school. We just give their demographic profile because this is not about, picking at one high school or another. Honors English 9. The school doesn't have a English 9. It says 2 different students and 2 different classes, but the class is both Honors English 9. And you can see the difference in what they're reading in class. And so again, this is showing variation even within a school from classroom to classroom. And I think that's a really important point too, because sometimes I think we get locked into this idea about differences between schools, but it's also differences within the school. One class is getting audio recordings of a book and excerpts, and the other class is reading 5 books that are, a good range of materials. I will note in the second class, that student expressed, that the questions being asked and the discussion was not as rigorous, that there was not specific questions that lowered the rigor of the class as well. And again, this is a school that is 22.5% of students receiving free and reduced meals, 8.2%. This is not as much of a high poverty school, but we're still seeing these discrepancies across the classroom.
And I will start by saying we have been working very closely with MCPS, and we do appreciate, we have been meeting for a year, and really appreciate the partnership, and that they really have been open to feedback, and I give a lot of it. So I really appreciate it, because I think it's a very collaborative effort. MCPS did write their own curriculum. It piloted in 9 high schools this year, and all high schools are going to use it next year. These were some of our initial concerns. It is not a nationally vetted curriculum, and many of the nationally vetted ed report curriculums do have, daily lesson plans And that choice may lead to inequitable experiences. There's still a lot of text choice. I know we've made a lot of progress in high school. There used to be more choices, and we have reduced some of the choices, but that could lead to experiences that are not equal. And there is mixed rigor in the text. Like March 1 is in Study Sync in middle school, and it's also in high school. So we can go to the next slide. And these are some of our 9th grade text choices. And again, we want to highlight, and there's multiple, we'll get into Lexile levels. I saw someone in the chat said, I love Lexiles. There are some that we are concerned about the level of rigor, and there are only a few that are within the grade level band. And you could see quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. The concern remains that a child could have an experience where you read Magic Fish, which is a graphic novel, then March. I'm going to skip quarter 3 for a minute because it's probably, it may change, and then read Romeo and Juliet, where another child might read Separate Peace, maybe of Mice and Men, and then 12th Night. And we know we want mirrors and windows. We want to make sure everyone's experience is balanced, both with contemporary and diverse literature. And the choices may still lead to that experience where everyone's doing a different thing and maybe not getting all the same great stuff. So next slide. And I said MCPS has been very responsive to feedback, and one of our ideas was piloting an actual unit from a curriculum. Global food production comes from Odell. It's a very well-created unit with daily lesson plans. There's been talk about maybe Louisiana Guidebook, Teenage Brain, if you're familiar with any of these nationally vetted curriculum, of actually piloting established units that have these incredible lessons. And we appreciate that. And I believe, Evelyn, this is you.
Okay, so again, if you remember the research from the very beginning from CMCP, one of the things that they found, though, is when you gave teachers a lot of discretion, quite often they picked lower complexity texts. And that was happening even through the Johns Hopkins study. That's what they were finding, right? And so this is some data.
Evelyn, can I just add something there, which is, just to be very clear, there is no assumption about why that was. So I'm responding to earlier comments in the chat, which is, that is not to say that teachers are intentionally picking low quality assignments for kids. I want to make sure that I'm not saying that, and that is very clear. It is not that. It may be that teachers don't have access to strong assignments, that teachers are not clear on what the rigor of the standards, particularly the standards that are still relatively new in the grand scheme of things, actually mean. Or it could be that they don't have the resources that they need. Do not want anyone to interpret anything I've said as that teachers are intentionally lowering rigor. It could be unconscious bias. It could be any number of reasons that assignments were not consistently at grade level.
Yeah, and again, like and thank you for raising that, because we have a T in PTA. This is not at all about saying this teacher's not doing this or that teacher's not doing this, or even the school. I mean, these are national things that are happening. This is actually why the Common Core standards were created, in a sense, right? And we're all learning, and our teachers, as we all know, have a lot on their plate. So a lot of our solutions that we're proposing, like a curriculum, are to take some of that mental labor so that they can focus on implementation, because there are a lot of implementation challenges right now. I think people have even posted in the chat about how it is right now, especially after the pandemic. So but just kind of going back to this, this is some survey data as they're doing the revised 9 English curriculum. Remember, it's not all schools, but you can see which text the teachers ended up picking in marking period 1 and marking period 2. And I'm going to put out as a statement, not all teachers responded to the surveys. Some teachers taught more than one text in a marking period. But this gives you a sense that a large number of teachers did pick books that were below the grade level band for a Lexile band for grade 9. So both in marking period 1 and marking period 2. Okay, so I'm going to give another disclaimer. So Lexile are just one measure of text complexity. And again, I'm only measuring quantitative complexity, not qualitative complexity. We're just using this for illustrative purposes because, you know, maybe one book in the lower band is fine, but you're seeing that what we're concerned about is when, you know, there are multiple books, most of the books are below the grade level band. And it is one measure of text complexity that we can see easily. It's easier for me to pull this than to, you know, read every single book and tell you the qualitative complexity. But Johns Hopkins, TNCP, Ed reports, this is part of their analysis of looking at the quantitative text complexity as a measure. And, you know, again, we're just looking at the overall trends. However, that doesn't mean quantitative text complexity is not important. And so this is a couple of graphs that will tell you you know, this is a study that was done some time ago, looking at what is the Lexiles for things that people will have to read outside of high school, right? Outside in the real world, right? So you can see on the left column, the text complexity that, you know, schools that we're seeing for high school literature, and compare that to if you're in the military, you know, about 1,200 Lexiles, what, you know, most of the texts were. College textbooks, definitely higher, you know, personal use, entry-level occupations, SATs, and then on the right column, you can see, you know, where the average Lexile demands were for a 12th grader versus what would be expected for college. So you can see that there is a gap. And so part of the reason why the Common Core standards were implemented was that nationwide there was this gap, and they realized we need to backtrack and make sure that all along the way, K through 12, the students are, you know, reading higher level texts and being exposed to higher level texts so that they're ready when they leave high school. So, and I'm just gonna, I get questions of folks of like who say like, you know, why is it so important? Like, why does it matter? And so, you know, maybe not every kid wants to go to college. Although as you saw in the TNCP, you know, study, I think most kids want to go to college, or they want to go into a career that requires a college degree. But regardless, just to operate in the world, you know, these are the Lexiles I threw into this Lexile analyzer. This is the kind of documents that the Lexiles that you will need to be able to read the newspaper, to read your dishwasher warranty. You know, we talk about financial literacy and the importance of financial literacy, but you will need actual literacy to read your lease agreement, your loan agreement. You know, if you are going to be an HVAC contractor, the Lexile for that textbook is quite high as well, right? In 9th grade, which people have asked about the MISA and the MCAP, one thing that, you know, we want to point out is if you look at that test, it requires a certain level of literacy. So I pulled a sample, you know, excerpt, and you can see the Lexiles. And so those are the Lexiles. Now, these are not, you know, beautiful, joyful literary texts, right? They don't have meta language, but, you know, we want to be able to read these things when we leave high school, right? Okay. Oh, Becca?
Okay, and we know, sadly, and children are reading, you know, much less and much less for fun. I'm seeing this even in my own house, where there's a lot of books, like where their kids are not reading as much. And we know then we need to then make sure we are reading a lot in schools if it's not happening outside. Next slide. And again, in the opportunity myth, one of the things, it's not just a curriculum, it's also the task and what kids do with it. So even if you are reading Great Gatsby, what you do with it is as important as the text that you read. And so we just want to ensure and hope that the task that MCPS does write and include in their curriculum is very specific. And I know they're moving towards that. And you could glance and see a very specific example and one that's less specific that would require kids, really, you don't have to read the book to answer number 2. You do have to read the book to answer number 1. So we just want to make sure the task and how kids write and what they're expected to write is grade level. And this is what we mean. Yep, going. All right, so this is just an example. I don't sell curriculum. I am a 10th grade teacher myself. So, but this is an example of topics that are built out over time. And there is some choice in a lot of high school curriculums. You don't always do all of these, but all of them are equally rigorous. So I would be happy with any of these units. We could keep going. And here's another example of, this is Louisiana Guidebooks. Above was Odell, if you ever want to look into them. Again, just showing different topics that are built over time. So kids would have to really use a lot of knowledge, a lot of vocab, and read a lot of complex texts. And there's also books and novels, and then also big ideas. Next one. And so our recommendation is to really articulate a shared vision for high school and build that teacher capacity. We know, again, curriculum is just a piece of a very large puzzle. It's just the treadmill. We need to run and make sure that we really leverage this time and this pilot for buy-in. We have this great opportunity to try some of these units and not wait on that. And I know MCPS has been open to that. And we hope that, and we, again, appreciate, because we are working together and throwing a lot of ideas together, and to create an RFP to leverage the lessons that we've learned from K-5 to really select a nationally vetted, very strong curriculum, or ensure, we have all these pieces in place. And again, we will have a survey. So I see there's a lot of questions and a lot of lived experiences, and we want that data from you.
So thank you. So we've shared what we as stakeholders know from the outside, and I want to just recognize too that when this English 9 review process began, there was a lot more discussion, and as you saw from the Johns Hopkins report, it was only applied to K through 8, but I don't think there's any reason to believe it wouldn't apply to high school. That discussion was leading to a lot of disparity, difference, and consistency. So we do appreciate all the fact that this current revision has a lot more resources for teachers, so they don't have to make things up on their own, and pull resources from outside, like the Johns Hopkins report found that teachers were doing. But we also want to ask Jackie Light, see if she can also provide some more detail and insights into the other revisions and sort of where they're going with the English 9 curriculum, because I know they're continuing to work on this and assess and think about it.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
So do we want to move into the next
you.
slides then?
Oh, yes, that was me. Yes,
Yeah,
there we go.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. And we really do value this partnership, and we've gotten some really constructive recommendations, and we've been working to implement them. But going back in time a little bit, we just kind of want to share where this all has come from. So in 2022 is when we received feedback from the state. At the time, they were vetting all of the curricula across the state. And they gave us some feedback. Basically, they said, you need to improve. There are some things you really need to address here. They did find that in our existing curriculum, which we had since Common Core had come out, we had really strong text complexity and variety of text for students to read, and then writing from sources and text-based evidence. So those are things that they found in our curriculum were really well supported and built out. And there was a clear evidence that teachers would be implementing those pieces. Where they didn't see as clearly was how we were doing that explicit instruction around reading and how that was aligned to the standards. It was a little bit more open and geared more toward the writing task. So it wasn't as evident, how are we making sure kids are learning how to read these complex texts? And then what they also weren't able to see as clearly was how teachers were differentiating, whether that was providing scaffolds or extensions and enrichment. And while we did have resources to provide to teachers, the curriculum itself and the curriculum proper, it wasn't obvious how we were expecting teachers to do that. So that kind of led us to some really clear goals for our revision. And so we began with that feedback, but then ultimately over time, we worked in elements of these really brilliant externally vetted curricula, Odell being the main one that we have pulled from. And that was part of our, partnership with our partners here in terms of that conversation and why we made that decision. So Odell features very prominently in our revised curriculum. We also have used some of the structures that Engage New York has embedded. And then Rebecca also mentioned a unit from Louisiana guidebooks that, we're hoping that teachers now will see there are some really great options that all address the same standards and have the same, comparable levels of challenge for students. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, great. So we just want to elevate, what are the big things that you're going to see that's different in terms of English 9, what it used to be and what it will be moving forward. One is that you'll see a greater emphasis on informational text. What we have done is that for each anchor text, we have built out a text set along with text-dependent questions. And that really allows us to provide students with access to a variety of texts that are all centered around the same topic or perhaps historical period or event. In order to make sure that we're addressing that key shift in the Common Core, to make sure that students have access to that content-rich nonfiction. I mentioned the implementation of Odell. We also have a lot of resources in there from Common Lit. They have fantastic grade level aligned text-dependent questions, and so we've built in those pieces as well. We have much more explicit guidance around how to do that explicit instruction in reading skills, pre-assessments within each unit that are aligned to the common writing task or progress check. We've also streamlined the structure. Our previous curriculum had teachers bouncing around a bit from different types of writing within one marking period. So what that resulted in was a feeling of kind of, okay, we just have to get this writing task done, as opposed to really taking the time to do that deep writing instruction. And so our new structure supports that much better. We've also provided very explicit instruction in terms of how to differentiate for students who are receiving special education services for EMLs, as well as students who need that enrichment or extension. We have narrowed the text selections that we've talked about. And we also are bringing that explicit social justice lens in terms of, looking at some of these texts that are historically studied and looking in terms of the perspective of the person writing and then whose voices are left out. And so with our anchor texts, we're really trying to strike a balance between contemporary texts and then the historically celebrated texts in order to make sure that we have a rich selection for students, as well as those text sets, which really give them a lot more access to a variety of texts. The next slide, please. Thank you. So we wanted to share that we do try as much as we can to get feedback from as many different stakeholders as possible. So we have, of course, met with the Curriculum Advisory Committee of the MCCPTA. We've also engaged with various community groups, surveyed our students, our teachers and resource teachers, administrators. And we've gone to our Council for Teaching and Learning, who are representatives of teachers in the district. So to try to get as much input as we can, while also working internally with other offices like our special education office and our Department of English Learners and Multilingual Education. And what we find through gathering all of this input is that there's so much of it, and so much of it is really driving what we're doing, but there are also times when the feedback contradicts, right? So we can't always necessarily make sure that every suggestion is implemented, but we do try to do our absolute best to gather and to make sure that we're making the best decisions that are supported by research for our students. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so when we heard some of these initial concerns that were raised about the text complexity and the tasks, we really wanted to take a step back. And so we expanded the research that we were doing to make sure that, we could really stand behind the text choices that we made. We also wanted to make sure that we provided teachers with some guidance about how do you make choices among, the ones that we're offering, so that we're striking a balance, and so that we're not providing numerous texts that are too similar, that don't really provide that range of voices. So we're providing some more specific guidance around how to do that. We also gathered a lot of instructional examples of how teachers were using the materials and texts, again, surveyed. And then we have made significant adjustments. So based on the feedback we've gotten, going out into classrooms, hearing from stakeholders, we've made a lot of changes in order to make sure that what we're doing is truly at the appropriate level of rigor for our 9th graders. Go to the next slide. And this is not an exhaustive list, but we just wanted to give you some examples of some of the revisions that we've made based on the feedback that we've gotten. So I won't go through all of this because a lot of it's been covered. But we just wanted to give you some examples. This, partnership and working through feedback has been really beneficial in making sure that we are making the most out of leveraging the external curricula that are out there and being sure that teachers are equipped with as much information, as many resources as possible, so that we don't have the same level of variability that we had in the previous curriculum. Okay. This is some feedback that we have gathered from our pilot school teachers. Again, not going to read it all to you, but just to elevate a few highlights. What we're finding from the teachers is that, as I mentioned, the structure really allows for that depth of writing instruction. The teachers feel that there are a lot of resources that really allow them to be responsive to their students' needs, that the flow and sequence of the units was very logical and allowed for them to really, again, go into that depth. And then also that it was really difficult, but that appreciating the rigor and making sure that students are set up for success throughout the rest of high school. So, and I think when we're talking about texts and are they complex enough, I saw Reagan elevate in the chat the importance of that qualitative complexity measure. And that is one of the major things that we do talk about, because Lexile is important, absolutely, but we also recognize that it does not take into account the depth of meaning, the metaphorical meanings, the narrative structures, flashbacks, all of those different things that make a text challenging and complex for students. And when we look at some of the texts that we have, like say in our 12th grade classes, if you look at the Lexile level alone, example would be The Sound and the Fury, one of the most challenging texts I have personally ever read. Studied in 12th grade. If you just look at it, but with Lexile alone, it would be a 5th grade text, but we know very well it's not a 5th grade text. So we try to make sure we're looking at the whole picture and making sure that students have access to those rigorous opportunities.
Sorry, this is mine. Thanks, Jackie. So I want to make sure, and by the way, I'm just going to land on this survey. Again, we've got PTA leaders here. I want to make sure people have, and parents have the information they need as they see this implemented at all schools in the fall. So I know the questions, some questions that might come up, parents, and we agree with this, we believe that like whole novels and whole texts and whole plays are really important, but they will also see excerpts and nonfiction, and I get that question a lot, like why are they seeing nonfiction and excerpts? And I was wondering if you could address that, like when is an excerpt appropriate? When would be, when would there be a whole text?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the pieces I think I spoke to a little bit earlier was that when the Common Core first came out, one of the main shifts was about making sure students regularly are reading content-rich nonfiction. And so our approach in the curriculum is to, of course, include those full texts, so the novels and plays, but build around them a set of related texts, such as not just informational texts, but poems, short stories, other pieces. So, the impact of a student reading not just a novel, but also related to that novel, a news article, an opinion piece, a piece with some data charts, a speech, a poem, maybe a song or video or a short story, all that kind of relate and touch upon the same topic or time in history, and show different perspectives on that time or topic, is a lot richer experience than just reading the novel by itself. And so it helps to build knowledge. It helps students develop their ability to unpack all different kinds of texts that they'll encounter when they leave us. And then it also really helps build out that diversity of voices and ensure that every single day students are putting their eyes on a complex text. So while we're not necessarily as interested in counting how many full-length texts we are, we're expecting full-length text to be used, but what's more of a priority is, are kids reading those complex texts in class every day? Is every lesson centered on a complex text? That is ultimately our priority. And those anchor texts are what kind of keep that unit feeling cohesive for students and something to keep coming back to and write about and talk about. So that's a brief answer.
So if a parent is seeing, because we're having studies saying that sometimes we'll see that those full-length texts don't show up and it's just excerpts, or if they're seeing a lot of similar type things, maybe they're all contemporary books instead of, a mix of contemporary and classical or canonical, whatever you want to call it, historical text. What is the expectation? Is there anything to kind of help like who would they contact? So what would they do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always want to start with the teacher and just find out, you know, what is really happening in the classroom. Can you share with me the text that students are reading? And, you know, can you share with me a little bit about this unit and why these texts are being implemented? I think StudySync does do a nice job of providing a pretty wide variety within each unit. And so if a parent feels like that's not happening, I think it's a fair question to say, okay, like, can you walk me through, you know, what parts of this unit we're doing in class and why those choices? And it's totally fair to ask that question. And we do have on our parent facing overviews of StudySync, which are on our website. It will outline sort of what you can expect to see in a StudySync class, in a middle school ELA class. So that's a resource that might be helpful, and it's just on our regular MCPS website.
And so for high school, once the English 9 curriculum is completed, is that going to be on a website or somewhere public where parents can see like a guide of what they can expect their child to be doing?
Yes, absolutely. So similar to how we have the overviews for middle school, we'll have a parallel version for high school. And on that document, we already have in place to share those same pieces of like what you can expect. Like, what are some things that, you know, where there might be some choices involved, what are the things that everybody should be experiencing, just so that a parent can know when they're asking questions, what really the baseline is, and then how does a teacher implement that.
Okay, and Donna, you can jump into like, are principals going to be trained like they were for elementary, and like beyond the kind of summer trainings, what kind of year-round support is going to be offered to teachers? And
yeah,
do that in the chat
that's
too.
a great question. Yes, and so very similar to what Donna shared. So the principals and administrators are included in our summer professional learning, but we also know that sometimes it's difficult, you know, to get to it, and so we always try to push into their existing spaces as well, and share information about the curriculum with them. And I think, you know, I believe Donna touched on this a little bit, but just we have those structures that we're continually refining to make sure that the folks who are out in the schools and supporting principals and working with teachers have all of the most up-to-date information. So we're definitely, you know, following the model that elementary is using and ensuring that our leaders are prepared to support teachers in implementing our new curriculum.
Okay. And we're getting a lot of energy, a lot of questions about what if even this, you know, grade level curriculum is not enriched or accelerated enough for our students, you know, our gifted and talented students or gifted students. Is there enrichment or extensions built into the curriculum, or?
Yeah, actually, week by week, we have recommendations for ways you can scaffold and also ways you can extend and enrich. And then also for the like major writing tasks and projects, there are enrichment options for those. There are also, you know, many texts that, you know, that are part of our lit circles that allow for that choice, and making sure that students have a lot of different texts that they should be able to read over the course of a school year. Even if it's not necessarily the anchor text, there's all kinds of really challenging texts in our lit circle list, which is much longer than the list of the anchor text. So within the text tasks and also the process, there's all kinds of suggestions to make sure that students have access to that enrichment.
I'm going to stop this share because I can't see anyone. Oh, wait, before we go, so I just realized, we are running a little long. So listen, I know that there's a lot of questions. We're going to save the chat. We'll try to come up with a Q&A, but we have some important points before we call it a night. So everything we've, and I want to really thank, you know, our MCPS leaders for coming tonight, you know, after hours, talking about all of this, as well as like the loads of work that they've been working on to make this happen. But as you can see, you know, high quality instructional materials, they're not cost free. Professional development coaching, also it's a cost. You know, making sure that we have staffing so teachers have time to plan. These are, especially in elementary, these are some shifts. In middle school, these are some shifts. High school, these are some shifts. And so Right now, the budget is up for a vote before the county council, and so we would still like to, ask our members to please support a full budget. We have some links to your state reps, your county reps, or BOE passed it, but just make sure we keep up the support for the budget, because all the things that I hear people like, we have to fund the time. Like, time is money, and giving our staff time to plan and do this professional development and coaching and talking to each other and the peer leading group, all that stuff is, needs to be funded with a full budget. And likewise, just a pitch for the curriculum committee. If you found this interesting, found things new, have lots to say to us, feel free to join our listserv. And oops, wait, I didn't close anything, right? Okay. And please join our committee. So I think we are, we've got a few more minutes. Let me just check to see if you've got anything in the chat that we can answer in like 5 minutes. Oh yes, and thank you to all the MCPS staff for joining, because this was a lot, and thank you for all of you guys for lasting 2 hours. This is pretty dense stuff. Okay.
Evelyn,
Yeah.
I think at this time, if we could just look over the questions and maybe take a few that are directly related to this discussion today for us to kind of look at and respond to, would maybe be better for us.
I saw a question about expectations of reading in class in high school versus reading as homework, and I'm wondering if there's any guidance about that, since we saw that that we know a lot of kids are having experiences where everything's being read aloud or audio, where some are reading it at home. And is there a general expectation for honors 9th grade English?
I would say that while we know that it can be difficult to know for certain that every student has had the opportunity to read the full reading assignment at home the night before, we want to leverage opportunities to get kids into the text and talking about it, whether they've read the whole thing at home or not, right? So we assign reading, you come in, and we provide you with a really rich piece of that text to dive into as a class and discuss. I think often, people will sometimes maybe walk into what we call an instructional read aloud, which is a very different thing than just reading a text, for an entire class period. So we have been supporting our leaders and showing them some examples of an instructional read aloud, which is where you do read the text aloud, you're modeling fluent reading, but you're pausing deliberately and asking really strategic questions versus we're just going to use this 45 minutes to get through the book, right? So those are two very different things. And we've communicated those expectations to our leaders so that teachers can really use that time, as best they possibly can. And we've tried to also help them troubleshoot, like, what do we do when, we know that kids haven't necessarily read the text, and we're providing them with different ways to approach that in terms of still getting the kids into it and discussing it while they're there in the classroom, and that time is maximized.
Maybe I don't know if there's one question, any question that MCPS wants to saw in the chat that they just want to address now, or any clarifications? Okay, so I just want to thank again everyone for this super long workshop. It will be recorded. Give us a little time, because we're gonna call the chat, see if we need to the slides, we're gonna try to flesh them out so that when people read them. So it might take a little while, but we'll circulate everything. Feel free to contact me if you have any follow-ups. We do have 2 surveys that are in the chat. We do want to collect all of your experiences, on the ground, because I think those real life experiences are really important. So please fill it out. Hopefully this is a way for you to also go back home and start asking some questions. I know I certainly have a lot more information that I learned while doing all this with my kids. So thank you everyone for making it this far along, and thank you so much to MCPS as well. Okay, I am
Thank you.
gonna close. Thank you.
Fill out your surveys.
Oh, and right in support of the budget.
That's right.
How do we save the chat? Did I save the chat? Save the chat. Wait, I think I did. Okay. I have saved